All right. Hey, what I'm going to do is, my hope for any time that we have this opportunity is, it's less about me asking a series of questions and more about what's on your mind. So I always try and say that the best way to moderate any discussion is to engage the audience in the intellectual content, to shape the intellectual content of it. Otherwise, Richard and I could go have a coffee somewhere and talk by ourselves. So I'd rather have it be your thoughts, your questions, your ideas. So let me just plant that seed. And when I come out and say, do you have something on your mind, please don't look at your shoes. Let's make sure that we're working together on this. What I am going to do is, Richard has been speaking to all kinds of different audiences, government leaders, a variety of ministers yesterday, a variety of industry leaders. So he's spoken on just about every topic from just about every angle. And the biggest apprehension for me is trying to come up with something that isn't like, okay, here we go, again. But let me just try and start off. Would you mind, just for those that may not know your own journey, I think it's always great as a bit of a table setting, your story as an entrepreneur, and then why you've decided to do what you're doing now, and then we'll jump in.
Sure. Hi everybody. I'm basically originally from Germany. I went to the United States for my PhD at Stanford, won Best Computer Science Thesis Award there in 2014. Almost became a professor, then decided to do a startup instead called MetaMind to bring AI to the enterprise, to basically build a very simple to use, easy to use platform for text and image classification. And we were only around for a year and 8 months, and then we got acquired by Salesforce, and that's how I became the chief scientist there now. And since a couple months ago, I'm also an adjunct professor at Stanford. And I love AI, and there's so many AI applications. I've also started doing some investments in the field in a variety of startups. So that's me.
All right. Well, since we're all about entrepreneurship and startups being the engine of lots of great economic opportunity, I'm going to ask you to spend another minute on that topic, which is, you chose to build a company and sell the company. One of the paths could have been continue to build the company and buy other companies. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what you saw as opposed to staying the entrepreneurial journey you decided to sell? Was it a scaling and resource question, or help some of the entrepreneurs in the room understand your thinking?
It's a good question. So I thought about, what do I need to make AI successful? And I think there are 3 things for making actual AI applications successful, and ideally you have competitive moat around each of them, or at least one of them, and that's data sets, algorithms, and workflow understanding. And sadly, in my startup, we had the best algorithms in the world, but we really didn't have the data sets. And integrating with those data sets, integrating with each customer took a very long time. And it didn't scale very well. It becomes basically a consulting kind of job. And then the workflow, to really understand where do you infuse the AI to make the biggest impact on somebody's workflow in sales or service or marketing or self-driving cars or agriculture, you name it. AI will have impact on all of these areas, but you need to understand the workflows of them. And I looked at a bunch of different places, and Salesforce fortunately has all the data in their actual data centers with the metadata associated with them. And because it's a cloud-based platform, and it's something I would encourage startups also to do and think about, they can track, like, where do people click? What's the website they're looking at? And then what are they looking at next? And what are they sorting and scrolling through and so on? So, and of course, that data is never shared. Trust is our number 1 value. But we can improve the interface, and we can infuse AI into the right places because of that. And so they're a perfect partner to take our algorithms and really scale them. And it would have taken us years or decades to get to that kind of scale.
Okay, so a wise man yesterday named Richard said, when you're looking at a startup, if they say they have the best algorithms, so you feel that your team had built some of the best algorithms. How do you look at the future? Is it about algorithms being even more amazing, or is it really now at this stage plenty of algos that can be pulled down, and it's really the quality of the training data?
So what I referred to yesterday is about secret algorithms, like somebody saying, oh, we have this amazing algorithm, but we're not going to tell anybody, and it's better than everybody else. We actually, inside the company, published also in the startup, in peer-reviewed academic journals and conferences to talk about the algorithms that we had. And I still think algorithms are important, especially if you want to work at the cutting edge of what's possible right now. And chatbots, for instance, are still not there. Chatbots, you cannot have a general conversation about all different kinds of things with a chatbot. They're very decision tree oriented, like, oh, you want your pizza topping, what's the next pizza topping? If you now all of a sudden start talking about the weather, companies might not want that, right? They don't want to tell you about the weather, they just want to know what the next pizza topping you have, so get it over with and order pizza. But at the same time, a lot of larger companies and more complex organizations have all kinds of different requirements, and so chatbots are a good example where you do need to continue to iterate on the algorithms and actually improve them. There are other areas where, if you have a lot of images, for instance, and examples, a good representative example, set of examples for a visual problem that you want to identify, like products and shelves, and you just want to count how many times you see a Diet Coke bottle in the shelf. And you can indeed collect thousands of examples of Diet Cokes in shelves, then eventually you can just automate that task and you don't need to do much algorithmic research. So it depends on the use case.
So since we're on the topic of data, part of what we're always wrestling with in terms of Singapore, Team Singapore, is this idea of privacy and anonymity and the importance of respecting the person. And GDPR obviously now has brought a new dimension to the idea of being able to own your data and delete it if you so wish and have others delete it if they have it. But there's also the idea that data is such an important engine, the quality of data, the right data. So perhaps not as a Salesforce chief scientist, but as Richard, do you have a perspective on how humanity ought to be thinking about this idea of I share data with the purpose of it being important for other humanity outcomes, or is it in fact, it's mine and it's up to me entirely and solely up to me if I choose to share it?
I think the answer is complicated, and putting my professorial hat on, that is the right first sentence for most every complex question. I can come up with a lot of examples where I don't want any of my data to be shared. I don't want my data to be shared about complex health issues, but isolated health issues, for instance, would be great to share. So if any head CT scan or chest X-ray gets anonymized and fed into a large government database with the outcomes that you're trying to classify, then that would be an immense improvement for radiology. And all of a sudden you can take the information and knowledge of the best radiologists in the world and infuse their knowledge into algorithms and then scale those algorithms, improve the speed with which you get radiology outputs and reports back. You can improve entire countries that don't have a history of great medical schools and people who study 12 plus years to get a radiology expertise, and help them leapfrog directly to having really, really good insights. I've heard some really heartbreaking stories of countries in Africa that actually get cheap scanners now from US hospitals that want to get the latest and greatest CT scanners and X-rays and so on. And they had the scanner and they had kids dying because the surgeon was saying, I can't go in without having a radiologist tell me where to go, what to cut out. And there are no radiologists on staff to actually understand the outputs of the scanner. So there's some really powerful applications where I would love for people to encourage to share their data, just similar to sort of organ donation. If the default is, I'm ready to share anonymized health data, and then again, anonymized is a pretty important point there, then I think that would be great for the government to encourage.
So let's pick up on that example for a second, because it's one that I think a lot of people can empathize with, which is, it's certainly not our goal, it's not the goal of startups with whom we work, this idea of if we could use image detection to somehow replace radiologists, no. But the idea of stratifying and helping say these 900 out of the 1,000 may not need the radiologist personal attention because they're, quote, normal. These 100 need a bit more attention, and allow that limited resource to be used efficiently. So when you think about efficiency and AI, is the right way for us to be approaching this brave new world to be thinking about improving current processes, or should we think of AI as some new, quote, disruptive and different? Improve the current, or just throw away what's happening now and let's go in a whole new direction enabled by AI?
Again, it highly depends on the use case that you look at. I can see arguments going both ways. So let's take, for instance, self-driving cars. So on top of mind for a lot of people. I can see how in the current environment, you just try to keep all the roads the same and just have some self-driving cars interact with other normal drivers. And you have to make that system robust in this kind of dual use scenario. But I can also very well see, and then you're just worried about jobs getting lost because there are no more drivers, taxi drivers lose their jobs, and truck drivers and so on. But you can also rethink the whole transportation mode, and you can start to think about maybe we'll have cars that help you with haircuts, like it's a haircut car, or it's a coffee car. And once you get into that coffee car, which you can also identify and try to find, you actually have a coffee with your friend while you're getting driven somewhere, and there's no driver, and you have not like the seats all facing forward, they're all looking at each other, and all of a sudden you can have people like actually providing new services while they're in the car, and then you can have special AI car lanes where the cars can drive bumper to bumper because they can all coordinate and almost don't need much more AI anymore at that point because you can just make very simple systems, and you have special AI car lanes, and there because the flow is much bigger, you can incentivize that also, you can reduce congestion and so on, and so, yeah, I can think about it both ways. I think in many cases, people are stuck in the current workflows that they have, and it's really hard to rethink a workflow from scratch. But you have to be really creative, and in some cases, it could be really lucrative to do that.
So let me pick up on this idea of social adoption, because autonomous vehicle being a good example. So whether you're a fan or not, and if you understand some of the ideas of level 3 and level 4 and level 5 autonomous driving, but this idea of, you can speak to a lot of engineers involved in the industry and they say, it's inevitable and I love it. And then you say, would you jump in it? And they say, of course I would. And then you say, would you put your 7-year-old in it? And they say, not yet, right? So how do we think about this idea of social adoption and the fact that people are quote unquote fearful? And I know you've spoken about things like, Skynet and Terminator, let's not be distracted. But this idea of generally bringing artificially intelligent systems into our lives, is that decades away? I hate to use the expression generational, but can you help us think about this idea of the tech may be one thing, but the use of it, the adoption of it?
Right. I think the future is already here, it's just not equally distributed, and that's true for AI as well. Like you have Facebook, Google. When you do a Google search, you have at least a dozen AI or machine learning classifiers that are working in the background to make that Google search very, very accurate. You classify what's the general intent. If it's a movie, then it just immediately shows you, the movies, identifies where you are, tries to find the closest proximity, runs like a test from like, if you have your location, like how long would it take to drive on the map to each one, and then sorts it by that. Like there's a lot going on in Google, and you're already using AI all the time for that. But then there are other cases in enterprise software where it's much, much harder for us to just run an A/B test, and we just change the whole interface. And now the button that some person who has been working on this with the software has been clicking in that exact location for 5 years, all of a sudden that button is different or looks different, or it's somewhere else, or it doesn't exist anymore, and now it's a speech interface or something like that. It would not work in enterprise software. People are like, I just don't know how to do my job anymore. And you see that in a lot of other cases where we want to change human behavior. One of the things we, for instance, one of the features we have is lead and opportunity scoring, where we tell you, if you're a salesperson, what is the most likely to succeed lead or opportunity that you should reach out to on that given day. We can analyze external data, we analyze all the internal communications of emails and everything, and if you're a large bank or insurance company, like you might have 5,000 people you could reach out to on any given day, and we tell you like, today these 10 people are most likely to actually want to buy your product. Now, if we tell them that, if you've been in the field for a long time, you say, well, look, like I've been doing sales for like 10 years. I don't need some AI algorithm to tell me what to do. But if the AI actually says, we're giving you this recommendation because of these 5 properties, these 5 features, Here a competitor was mentioned. This was actually going really well until some other person dropped the ball and just didn't respond anymore to that email from 2 weeks ago from this other part of the organization and so on. You should pick that up. Then all of a sudden you see more adoption. So in some cases of changing human workflows, you need explainability in your AI algorithms. And explainability is actually a really touchy subject because we often have to still make the trade-off, unfortunately, between explainable AI systems and the most accurate AI systems. So sometimes neural networks are not as easy to interpret the output of and interpret why they're making certain predictions. And simpler logistic regression algorithms with manual feature engineering are much easier to interpret. I personally am in the boat of I'd rather have a more accurate, unexplainable AI algorithm, even for tough stuff like medical or finance. Which, yeah, you laugh and a lot of people would get like fume and say like, Richard, how could you? This is crazy. But think about it, like you have an AI algorithm and one makes you $100,000 and you don't know why, and the other one loses $100,000 and tells you exactly why it made those bad financial decisions. I'd rather not know why I have more money than know exactly why I lost my money. Like you have an algorithm that saves 100 people or kills 20 and tells you exactly why and how it killed them. I'd still take the one that saves more people, even in these tough classification problems. But of course, it's hard, right? And I'll end it there. Like if you're the person whose child died because an AI made a mistake in medicine or in healthcare, right? You want to know why. You want to know what happened. And it's really tough when we have AI systems in the future that will, statistically speaking, save more lives than when people have done a certain kind of work. Self-driving cars are a good example. A lot of people die of driving, but they're always like, this is one person's problem. He didn't pay attention to it. He was texting while he was driving. But now if an AI, a single AI algorithm, a single company is responsible for a couple dozen deaths every year, which is better than a couple hundred deaths from lots of random people. But who do you blame? How do you deal with emotional issues that arise from that, even though it's objectively, statistically saying like a huge improvement for society overall?
So I follow you 100%. When we think about this idea of adoption, a lot of the feedback we get from healthcare providers is, I would be anxious about adopting it if I don't understand how it brought me to this point. So this idea of explainable or transparent. Can we see if there's anything on your mind? Yes, please.
And can somebody give her a microphone?
Is there a, yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Right here.
Hi, Richard. I'm Renee from Travel Business Analyst. You've been here in Singapore, and you probably understand that our aspirations to be the leading smart nation in the world, and also our aspirations to be one of the leading transport and aviation hubs. What have you seen in Singapore since you've been here that is noteworthiness in terms of AI applications of AI to our solutions? To our challenges. As you know, our population is 5.6 million, and we have 16 million inbound tourists, including yourself. and then we're having a special event coming on June the 12th, where it's massive security, massive expectations of non-conventional tourists, like Trump media, for example. Yeah. So my question is, from what you've seen, is there something else, something you could say that this would make a lot of difference in terms of, implementing this AI solution?
So the question is, what AI applications would I want to see? Or?
If I heard correctly, this idea of Singapore has certain strengths, Singapore has certain constraints, but in terms of the use of or deployment of AI, is there sort of something special or an angle that would help Singapore continue to move forward in a positive way?
So I actually think Singapore is in a very good position to make great use of AI. I love how focused you are on actually getting the smartest people into government and into different positions, and also having technical people. I'm amazed that some of your most senior leadership can actually program. I wish that was the case in more countries. And so you also have a lot more structure, and because it's a smaller city state, you can try out more things more quickly. And I think those are great properties that should help you get more AI features. You could actually try a driver AI assist lane for cars in a small area of the city and see and test and evaluate quickly whether that actually helps with congestion or something like that. You can also regulate your healthcare system in a way to get these kind of anonymized healthcare databases going, and then create AI algorithms, and then actually export that kind of top radiology knowledge into your neighboring countries and the rest of the world. So those would be some applications of AI that I think Singapore actually is in a great place to do.
We actually have that test running in Sentosa.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there another question, please?
Last one, I think we have time for.
Oh, we have one in the back there.
Hi, Richard. This is more as a perspective of you being a scientist than being from Salesforce. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, maybe speak a little louder.
So essentially, one of the interactions that I have with AI, typically as a customer, is with chatbots, right? And there are quite a few now within the Singapore context too, and globally. But each of those interactions are actually very poor. They leave me very frustrated, right? So it's essentially I can't get a solution out of that. I can get basic information, but not a solution. So what stops us at this stage to be able to develop chatbots which are actually effective? One, that's the first question. Second question is, as a scientist, do you see any companies that are doing chatbots, at least in a way that is actually helpful for the common person like me to actually get solutions on things that I may need from them? Right? So it doesn't have to be one company. If you could name 1, 2, or 3, I want to see what this thing is really about and what it can really do. And I want to see it as a common man. Yep.
Yeah, so there are two answers with my two different hats of why chatbots aren't working that well for people. The first one is that chatbots are often built to deflect service cases. If you have to have a human pick up a phone, you've already lost like $3 in the United States, or $5, which is why if some issue happens, like companies would much rather give you like a $5 coupon than have to pick up the phone just to make it go away. So if your deflection is your number one criterion for the success of your chatbot, then that might not mean customer satisfaction. It's just, though you hope there's some correlation, but there might not always be. But the more scientific and actually, to me, interesting research question is that language is incredibly hard. And currently, the field has gotten kind of stuck in thinking about each NLP, natural language processing, or AI application in isolation. All the research that we've seen, we have like a very specific algorithm that can play Go well, and a very specific algorithm that can do sentiment analysis very well, and seeing is this like positive, negative review or interaction. We have a different question, a different algorithm that identifies summaries and creates summaries of longer documents. We have yet a different algorithm that does question answering over a knowledge base. And so that all actually hurts a chatbot system where you have a larger decision tree kind of algorithm that says, are you in this position? And if so, then I will do this exact thing. And as soon as people veer off of that standard flow that you hand-coded into your current chatbot systems, it will break and it will not give you a great experience. And so in my research group, we're actually actively working on something that we call multitask learning, where we have a single algorithm that can answer all kinds of different questions about sentiment, summaries, translations, and a whole bunch of other things, like translating natural English questions into SQL queries, into database queries. Because in some cases, your chatbot might have to ask, like if you ask it in a customer kind of CRM use case, like how many leads do we have that are over $1 million in potential revenue and are in in Singapore? Now that might mean you have to run a database query with a bunch of if statements and a bunch of restrictions and so on to be able to give the correct answer. Now currently nobody's working on incorporating that thing with a sentiment where it's just like, God damn it, this stupid thing doesn't work. And now that's really negative sentiment, and now you probably want to escalate it to a person. Now that's a different feature. different group of people, different kinds of models. So multitask learning is my current answer to how we improve chatbots.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take one of the questions off the screen here. I'm going to slightly paraphrase
Very
it.
cool.
So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to ask you to think about the ethics of artificial intelligence. And so your research group, you and your group have been shaping and will continue to be shaping some of the directions of artificial intelligence systems. How do you think about this idea of bias, of ethics? And if I can ask you to think about it from another perspective, with so many other economies, this leapfrog effect that says it doesn't automatically follow that all great things in AI will come out of San Francisco or somewhere else. So how should we be thinking about this issue of ethics? And globally, do we need a United Nations of AI? How do you think of this, both as a scientist and as a professional?
So I actually think AI ethics is super important, and it hadn't been, up until a year or two ago, been on top of mind for a lot of AI researchers, largely because AI research hadn't really worked that well until a couple of years ago. Like, you don't have to worry about ethics implications of your stuff's not being used. And so now that it is actually being used in a lot of different places, a lot of us in the research world have woken up to this issue and are actively thinking about it. There are a lot of companies that are creating, for instance, a partnership on AI, which is an organization that combines like NGOs and various nonprofits with a lot of other large companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Salesforce and others, where we're thinking about ethical implications and fairness and so on. The biggest issue that I think we currently have is in the bias, both in terms of the problems that we work on, which results and is connected to the people who are working on those problems and who have AI knowledge, and the data sets that we use to train our AI algorithms. On the bias in terms of the people, like, the community does not work on identifying water sources in refugee areas. That is not like the standard problem that all AI people are focusing on. We're just classifying digits like thousands of times instead of working on those kinds of high impact problems. There are some people who are, pushing on that, but it's a lot of work because of the workflows and the data sets that you need to make it an actual successful application. And then AI researchers care more about the algorithm, so they just take what's standardly out there already. And then I think the diversity issue is also something that we're worried about. There are a lot of groups like Women in Machine Learning workshops and so on to try to encourage more diversity. There's Black in AI. We had the first kind of workshop next to one of our top conferences to try to encourage more people. Salesforce actually sponsored also the Machine Learning, Deep Learning Indaba, which is a great sort of summer school in Africa and a lot of different African countries. Because in the end, AI can lift you out of poverty like crazy too. Like, if you're in the Bay Area and you've had 2 or 3 academic deep learning research papers, you can make $200,000 to $500,000 a year in total comp. Like, it's insane. It is very, very competitive right now to hire people who have very good deep learning knowledge. And so that's the one side. Now, the bias in data sets is something that we also think about very carefully. One of the features that we just announced last year, and it's not yet GA, as in generally available for everybody, is Einstein Builder, where we allow you to train a classifier and predict any column from any other set of columns, which sounds kind of boring. What's are columns? But basically that covers 80% of business use cases for AI. It's a really powerful tool. You can predict, like, one column could be, did we accept this loan? Yes, no. And all the other columns are the data sets and features and properties of all the people you've given loans to or didn't give loans to. The output can be, did we answer this correctly? Did we make this sale? A lot of different things, like, is this person going to get a student loan? Will this person graduate college? Yes, no. There are a lot of interesting applications that we're seeing in even just our couple of pilot customers. Now, it's also a really scary feature because of how powerful it is. You can build a totally racist classifier. You look at your loans, and in the US, you're not allowed to have like a race column, right? It's illegal, and that's good. But if you just have the zip code and the income of somebody, and then you want to predict whether they should get that loan or not, well, it's segregated enough that you know exactly what ethnicity they would have based on their zip code and their income. And so we are basically, the way we're thinking about this is that before we go GA, we might even restrict the usage of this kind of feature and ask people to take, at the very least, a trailhead, a sort of learning module on our learning website called Trailhead that tells them about the potential ethical implications of AI as you're automating certain processes, to at least think about the biases that might be in our customers' data sets. And of course, we don't have access to those data sets. We only know this from our pilot customers because we're talking to them, but once the feature is generally available, customers can create anything and we wouldn't know exactly what's going on for them. So hopefully with this kind of trailhead of educating people around potential bias issues, we can mitigate some of those issues.
Okay, I want to be respectful to Richard's time, and I want to be respectful to your time. We could keep talking all day. I've got a bunch of questions. I'm sorry that we didn't have enough time to explore them all. So please join me in thanking Richard Socher. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.